Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The time is 9:04. Today is Thursday, December 5th, 2024. This is the first day of a two-day meeting of the Physical Therapy Board of California. Today, we are meeting in the hearing room at the Department of Consumer Affairs building located at 2005 Evergreen Street in Sacramento, California. This is an official business meeting of the Physical Therapy Board. The board's role remains to maintain consumer protection and consult with local and state entities on the laws and regulations pertaining to the physical therapy industry. We will take public comment on specific agenda items, and at the end of the meeting, there will be a comment session for items not on the agenda. Public comments must be specific to the agenda item that is being discussed. If you make a comment during a specific agenda item that is not related to that topic, you will be directed to hold your comments until we reach the appropriate agenda item. All comments that do not directly relate to an item on the agenda should be held until the agenda item for items not on the agenda. The board follows the Open Meeting Act, so while we accept and appreciate the public's comments, we cannot respond to those comments. Okay. We do not have a moderator from the Department of Consumer Affairs online to help us today. Individuals listening to the meeting will have an opportunity to provide public comment and will be assisted by a moderator who will be facilitating the teleconferencing process.
That's actually
That's
optional. We're not offering that service.
okay. Thank you. This meeting is being recorded and minutes of the meeting will be prepared. Can we please have roll call?
Tanya McMillian,
Present.
Dale Armstrong. Dale Armstrong is absent. Karen Brandon,
Present.
Katarina Ellaby. Katarina Ellaby is absent. Samuel Q.
Present.
Alicia Rabin-Aman. Here. All members are present with the exception of Dale Armstrong and Katarina Ellaby, and the board has a quorum.
Thank you. May I ask Member Brandon to read the board's mission statement?
Certainly, Madam President. The Physical Therapy Board of California mission is to advance and protect the interests of the people of California by the effective administration of the Physical Therapy Practice Act.
Thank you. Okay. We will move to, thank you, Alicia. Agenda item number 6, review and approval of June 13, 14, 2024 meeting minutes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Kim Rosakis, and I will be going over the September 17th, 18th meeting minutes. We're going to start on page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Page 14. Page 15. Page 16. Page 17. Page 18. Page 19. Page 20. Page 21. page 22. Page 23. Page 24. Page 25. Page 26. And page 27. Yeah.
No edits. I thought the minutes were very well written.
Thank you. I had some help from legal counsel and Brooke.
It
I
looks
appreciate
great.
them.
Yeah.
Just so everybody, so that we're all on the same page, the agenda numbers are different
Oh no. Okay.
here than in the book.
Okay.
So that would, I'm gonna follow this.
Okay.
So that would actually be agenda item number 5.
Thank you for catching that, Tanya.
Okay.
Can I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes for September 17, 18 as written?
I second.
Any comment from the board? Any public comment? Hearing none. Motion pass. Vote.
Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
Dale Armstrong. Dale Armstrong is absent. Karen Brandon,
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby. Katarina Ellaby is absent. Sam Q.
Aye.
Alicia Benamen.
Aye.
4-0, motion carried to approve or adopt the September 2024 meeting minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Madam President, very briefly, Michael Connotes, legal counsel. Just want to make sure that there are no substantive differences between the agendas. It's just a numbering issue. Just want to make sure we have everything agendized. I'm trying to pull them both up and compare right now, but let's just keep that in mind. Please keep going and we can make sure.
Thank you. So, okay.
I turn it back over to you, Madam President.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll move on to number 6 on your agenda, the president's report. This is our calendar. I think I have it. Jason?
So, looking at forward at 2025, we just want to kind of revisit the calendar, make sure that the dates proposed are still in alignment with everyone's schedules. If there's anything that you see or might be able to predict as being problematic, now is the time really to bring it to our attention. I think the thing that staff would probably want to highlight the most is the block of time for September of next year. Thank you. We are trying to coordinate our board meeting around the Southern California legislative requirement to also kind of mesh or come into alignment with CPTA's annual conference so that we can have some cost savings in travel that would allow us to attend. And so while their conference is the weekend before what we're proposing, we're also trying to make a little bit more use of that date range. You'll see it's listed as 3 dates. And the idea here is on the Monday that we actually are able to hold an in-person expert consultant training for folks in Southern California, and then have board business on the Tuesday and Wednesday of that week. Assuming at this point that the operational need means that we have to have a 2-day meeting as norm. I mean, there is a possibility that we would do the expert consultant training on Monday and then maybe be able to condense board business into a single day on Tuesday. But just for, the conservative planning and the sake of scheduling, we're blocking out those 3 days. And we're interested in any kind of conversation you might have about that.
Jason, I have a question. How often do we do the expert training? And that's an in-person one, right?
That's what we want to do. The last couple expert consultant trainings that we've done have been virtual. We'd like to get back to kind of the pre-pandemic norm, if you will. And I think the trainings are more effective when they are in person. We're able to do some mock trials and things like that to give the experts a little bit better understanding of their commitment to being an expert and what that might entail. Not to say that our virtual training is not excellent. We're going to touch on that a little bit in some agenda items here in a minute. But we would like to do one expert consultant training a year, moving it and rotating it from Southern California and Northern California. It's easier for us to do an in-person training in Northern California, clearly here. We're hoping that the host of our September meeting is able to block out that amount of time so that we can also squeeze the expert consultant training in for that as well.
Another question to that point. We already completed the applications for our current group of expert consultants, or is it an ongoing?
It's an ongoing rotation. We're always looking for new experts for a number of different reasons. Case specialty, the specialty that the expert might bring to the particular allegation that's brought to our attention. Geographic demand. I mean, we have a lot of Southern California experts. We don't have a whole lot of northernmost Northern California experts. And so there's always a recruitment process that's happening for new experts. It's much better to have too many to choose from than not enough. This last round of expert consultant trainings was a huge relief to enforcement staff. It provided quite a few new experts to kind of tap into and rely on. And so there's a little bit less logistical juggling that has to happen with that. And we'd like to keep that trend going.
Thank you.
Are we done on that particular issue?
I would just like to add that I'm extremely pleased to report that I have no conflicts with any of those dates. And I'd also really like to thank the board for its accommodation on behalf of the legal division. And this board has really accommodated all of the conflicts that I've had that were created when I was assigned to a board with 3 or 4 meetings every year conflicting. So I really appreciate those efforts.
I'll just add to that for the sake of transparency so that everybody understands is that the Physical Therapy Board in some ways is competing for resources, not just with the legal division and Michael himself, Michael having more than one client than just the Physical Therapy Board. And so while he is thanking us for our flexibility, we'd like to kind of echo that back, right? Like, we appreciate you as counsel and your ability to probably travel too many days in a single week just to accommodate all your clients. At the same time, we're also talking about scheduling conflicts when it comes to meeting rooms and the ability to webcast or provide hybrid services, those kind of things. There are 38 other boards and bureaus inside of the Department of Consumer Affairs. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are 4 webcasters employed by the Department of Consumer Affairs. So you can imagine sometimes there's some logistic 3. There's only 3. Well, okay. It's worse than I thought it was. Sometimes we have to move around. Sometimes they have to move around. There's some logistical shuffling that has to occur. So both with IT resources, but just also facilities, locations. So.
Yeah, I agree. Michael, you're very valuable to us, so thank you. Yeah.
Lord, yes. Okay.
So I wanted to bring up through December, we had said that, unless I have it wrong, that the meeting would be in March on Wednesday and Thursday, the 19th and 20th, but I see on the proposed calendar, it's the 18th and 19th. Is that correct?
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the 18th and 19th is one of the accommodations that Michael is referring to that allows for his
Yeah.
participation.
Yeah, precisely. So based on that, I'll be at your meeting on that Tuesday, Wednesday, 19th and 20th, and accounting on the 20th and 21st.
Okay.
Thank you.
The other thing about that meeting in particular is while we had, speaking of locations and geographical conflicts and scheduling conflicts, we had previously planned on going to Gurnick Academy in the Bay Area for March's meeting. Logistically, we realized that we needed to make some arrangements, and so now we will be going to the University of Pacific in Stockton for that meeting. And I'm hoping that the epiphany of the date change doesn't change any of that.
Not at all.
Okay.
We'll find someplace.
I could make an attempt to appear in person at one meeting and attend the other one virtually simultaneously, but I don't think that would be very sufficient for either party.
I think
So,
we divide your attention enough as it is.
We'll take you however you can get there, but we'd prefer you in person.
I wouldn't dream of not being.
I will say, just for the 2025 calendar, we have, up to this point, we have not been able to provide hybrid meeting services. With the recent changes in Bagley Keene, there are a few more hurdles to kind of jump over, but I would say that there is a really good possibility that we will have to cater or entertain to a hybrid meeting in 2025. And maybe even UOP being the first one that we do that for. So.
Any further comment on our calendar, proposed 2025 meeting calendar? Any public comment? Hearing none.
Are we looking for a motion? Adopt?
I move to adopt the proposed 2025 meeting calendar.
I second.
Any further comment from our board members? None. Any public comment? None. Okay.
Tanya
Take a
McMillian,
vote. Aye.
Dale Armstrong is absent. Karen Brandon,
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby is absent. Sam Pugh,
Aye.
Alicia Ben-Amen.
Aye.
4-0, motion carried to adopt the 2025 meeting calendar.
Thank you.
Just before you move on, just to kind of add one more piece, should a schedule conflict arise for any of you, in the next month or two or any time for 2025, the sooner that you're able to relay that information to staff and I, the better we are at kind of accommodating any kind of changes. Yes, you've adopted the calendar, but things happen, things change. And so while it's adopted, we're not married to it in the sense that we have to stick to it. If there are any kind of issues, please let us know.
I just want to remind everyone that I believe Miss Ellaby and I will be here for our final meeting in March. That puts the board quorum at 4. And the quorum's at 4, but that puts board membership at 4. And so if we're down one board member,
Yeah.
we can't take action. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that in the executive officer's report.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Moving on to item number 7, our executive officer's report.
So this report really is just a way for me to kind of highlight to you some of the things that I think, status of the board's operations and so on. First, I'll say it's good to see you all again. It's been a while. I was not at the September meeting. But I did just want to say that I have received some feedback about the September meeting, and all of it very positive. And actually, more feedback than I recall ever receiving for a board meeting that I attended. And feedback from about four different angles, right? So feedback from other boards, feedback from executive leadership at the Department of Consumer Affairs, feedback from the legal office of the Department of Consumer Affairs, more interest from schools wanting to engage in meetings, and even feedback from Sac State, the host of the September meeting, just letting us know that they would love to be considered for future meetings and hosting for future years. So I just want to say thank you to staff, thank you to the members, and selfishly from me, thank you to my AEO, Sarah Conley, for righting the ship while I was away. But like I said, I don't ever remember getting that much positive feedback. Something that's not quite categorical, I'd also like to point out that today we're also conducting 2 subject matter expert workshops for our occupational analysis with OPES today and tomorrow. So thank you to Brooke and Kim and to Sarah for coordinating that during a board meeting week. That's kind of a lot to do. It's kind of like planning 2 board meetings at the same time. So thank you for shouldering that pressure as well. I'll just point out a few highlights that I just want to emphasize, but most of these things will be covered in greater detail in the individual report outs tomorrow, well, today and tomorrow. First, for administrative services and our budget situation, we're working under the Department of Finance's issued budget letters currently. Of interest are letters 2324 and 2327, which anticipate significant general fund deficits in fiscal years 23-24 and 24-25 moving forward. Those letters state that we must take immediate action to reduce expenditures and identify all operational savings as we can. And you might remember from previous reports that we're planning for an 8% reduction in our overall budget and a vacancy sweep statewide. We've accounted for that 8% reduction with no detriment to operations. And as of now, we've not had to surrender any position authority. So knock on wood if you're with me. We currently have 2 vacancies, an analyst position in the admin unit and an analyst position in the continuing competency unit. We're actively and urgently trying to fill those and hoping not to be subject to losing them to any continuing vacancy drills or rounds in the near future. We still have 1 board member vacancy, which is becoming more emergent as time goes on. Looking back at my last report and risking repeating myself, I am hopeful that the vacancy will be filled soon. There have been several board appointments made in the last few months, including one to Barber and Cosmetology, one to the Contractor State Licensing Board, one to the Acupuncture Board, one to the Physician Assistance Board, and 2 to the Osteopathic Medical Board. So I think we're getting close to being next. From discussions, I do know that the Governor's Appointment Secretary is aware of our current needs and is also considering appointments for upcoming vacancies. So moving on to application services, I don't have much to report here. I'll just highlight that when we get to those materials, you'll see that we've been predicting an increase in PTA applications as a result of an increase in the number of PTA programs. And I think you'll see in the licensing services update tomorrow, we're starting to see that increase materialize. So for consumer protection, our enforcement program, I'll just echo what was reported to you in the September meeting. Our enforcement manager, Carol Phelps, has been kind of on a training kick. So they coordinated a training for the Division of Investigation in August and an expert consultant training in September. Something that we've been talking about for quite a while that we needed to return to coming out of the pandemic, very much needed. But again, derailed just by resources. But in addition, 2 of our newest analysts completed CLEAR's NCIT course, which is the National Certified Investigator and Inspector Training course. And Carol was able to fill her last vacancy. So we're pleased to be able to welcome Jim Heaton as the newest analyst to the CPS team. Mr. Heaton will be lightening the caseload of his teammates responsible for enforcement case review and investigation, up to and including issuance of citations for consumer complaints, adverse actions, malpractice reports, and conviction cases. For outreach, Q1 was another productive period for outreach with 7 presentations to PT and PTA programs and attendance at CPTA's annual conference in September. And while not in the Q1 report, I will say that it's gotten kind of even busier since then. In the 3rd week of October, I think we hit our high. In that week alone, we did 5 presentations. 2 of them were to high school students. One to the Antioch Unified School District's College and Career Fair, and one at the Arthur A. Benjamin Health Professions High School. Oh, and we also did another high school the following week after that. But I'll let April tell you more about that in the outreach report. And that is what I have for the executive officer's report. Any questions?
The content of the high school presentations are the function of the physical therapy board, and what's the response from the students? Or feedback?
I will tell you that the presentations that we formulated may not be the presentations that we use moving forward. We're learning at a very rapid pace. We're trying to serve kind of a multi-purpose, almost like a Swiss Army knife of outreach, right? So we are trying to do outreach for what the physical therapy profession is, what the regulation of the physical therapy profession is, but there's also a lot of interest from the schools about just the structure of the Department of Consumer Affairs, what it is like for us to be state employees, what they might look forward towards if they wanted to be a state employee. And so we're learning at a rapid pace how to kind of tailor these things. And it is very much different than what we do for PT or PTA programs. So the menu that we have offered for years has always been tailored to that audience. We now know that we have to kind of create a lunch menu, right? And create a different content criteria. And we're working with the Department of Consumer Affairs for some of that. And when I say that, I mean, some of the questions that we get, we want to take the opportunity to answer them, but we may not be the right subject matter experts to answer those questions. Somebody from the Department of Personnel Services or Cal HR or something like that, speaking to just state employment, might be better suited, or we can at least serve as a proxy for them. So it was different. And it was hard, right? It's like when you get up there and you think you're going to present a certain set of material and then the whole presentation kind of derails out, you start to learn, I got to learn how to speak this in another language, let alone just the content itself. So, but it was definitely enjoyable. I did 2. I know that April and Sarah have also done 2. It was, it's something that I know that, like I said, we're going to have to be a little bit more flexible and adaptable moving forward and kind of creating new content slideshows specifically for that criteria and that audience period. As an example, even the Arthur A. Benjamin School of Health Professionals, it was kind of weird for us when we walked on campus because all the students are wearing scrubs, right? So I felt comfortable in the materials that I was presenting. However, they were asking questions about professions that I don't have expertise in, right? And maybe not even Department of Consumer Affairs health professions, right? Certified nursing assistants and paramedics and those kind of things. And even more, how'd you get here? What's your story? How are you a state employee? What do I have to do to get your job? Okay, all right. I like the enthusiasm. I wasn't prepared for that yet, but we'll have to prepare for that in the future.
So what do we frame for the students as our primary purpose to be there?
I think one of the things that we're learning is that we have to do a little bit more querying in the initial request, right? So like for the career fair, it was much easier for us to adapt. Those students were there voluntarily. They're about to graduate from high school. They're looking towards the future and they want to know what options they have. So then it's almost more opportunistic, right? It's us being able to say, hey, okay, well, what are you interested in? And how does it fit in this category or that category? When we actually went to the schools themselves and we're just speaking in front of classrooms, it was a little bit different because they're still in the, this early decision period of their lives. And that's when it's kind of like, well, what does it take to be a state employee and that kind of thing, or even just the structure of professional government.
Yeah.
So we'll do a little bit better intake interview with the requesters themselves, just in an effort to be more prepared and that we're actually giving them what they're looking for.
Yeah. And at the same time, doing what our purpose is to be there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
At no time would we just go to talk about being a state employee. We'll always take advantage of that situation and pitch the regulation of the profession
Yeah.
and the reason for it.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm very happy to hear about these presentations, and you've predominantly done them here in Northern California. And so I'm hoping and praying that once you do the adjustments and,
I think it's kind of one of those things where word spreads,
yeah.
right? So, and even to April's credit, some of the events that we were able to book, she was proactive in seeking them out, but there were a few that were active in seeking her out, right? So, but we also tried to capitalize on that as well. The Antioch Career Fair, as an example, they sought us out and we said, this might be a good opportunity to bring some of the other DCA boards and bureaus with us, right? We are going to have a booth. Maybe they could have a booth. And we actually got 2 other DCA boards and bureaus to come with us to that career fair. So that lightens the load on us a little bit. It also expands kind of the knowledge. It's in alignment with the Department of Consumer Affairs strategic plan. I've always said that the Department of Consumer Affairs should be one of those government entities that the public knows as commonly as something as like the Department of Motor Vehicles or the California Highway Patrol, right? We're just a little under the radar for most consumers, and we could do a better job with that. And this is one of those things that we can do to expand that awareness.
Appreciate that so much, Jason. And I would like to add to my board members that a couple of months ago, I brought a group of my colleagues here, and they learned about the Physical Therapy Board and the Department of Consumer Affairs. And Jason and staff were so welcoming. I really appreciate it. And actually, 2 of the group, they are really looking into how to become a board member. And so, yeah, I've been educating folks all the time about
The feeling's
board.
mutual. That was an interesting engagement for us too, right? It's we can get kind of embedded into our delivery because the audience doesn't change much. When you get to say what you do to a whole different audience with a different perspective, you know that you have to change the language to account for that. And so that for us was like a really good training experience.
Thank you.
The next steps moving forward is, the career fairs are good for the high school students. We're also still looking for opportunities to collaborate with healthcare groups to come in and do actual consumer outreach. Again, consumer outreach is one of the hardest things. We just don't have that's a really moving target to find those opportunities. So.
Kudos.
So Jason, I think it's really, really important to highlight the fact that just what you said, the consumer outreach it can be as important as having these high school students recognize that they are technically consumers, their families are consumers, and that there is this protection in place for all types of services in California. And so I can see the challenge of okay, we're here going to make sure that they have an understanding that PT is regulated in California and this is how it's done. But at the same time, the bigger picture is that it's a good thing that it's regulated, and there are a lot of other opportunities. Have we ever in the past kind of coordinated with CPTA? And, so when you look at it, I like the idea of having multiple boards kind of represent a specific opportunity where high schoolers are there, especially career driven, but maybe also with CPTA, is there any?
Yeah, we're open to any collaboration, and we've done collaborative efforts with CPTA that's usually to their membership, right, and touching the licensing population in that way. But if they have avenues and they think it's appropriate for us to be included in consumer-based outreach for health programs, hospital programs, insurance programs, we're eager to be included in that group. And to Dr. Ra's comment, to her point, we have no shame. I'm going to take the opportunity to pitch us in the other three, perspectives while we're there. We're going to give them what they want. We're just going to give them a little bit more too, selfishly for our own mandate.
I just want to say that possibly programs and if they have a School of Health Science might be great outreach opportunities to consumers when they offer health fairs. And I know that our university does that, and there's a campus on here in Sacramento, so that's something to look into too.
Yeah, absolutely. If any of those kind of opportunities come to your attention, please let April or I know. We'll solicit and try to get our foot in the door. Speaking to the budget aspect of it and travel, those things are going to have to be, we'll have to consider those things as part of the decision-making process. But I like to keep the pilot programs, if you will, kind of local, right? To experiment with and polish the product and get it ready for presentation across the state. So.
Thank you, Jason. Any other questions for Jason? Can I get a motion?
Yeah,
Oh,
no
we
motion
don't. We
needed.
don't. You're right. Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
I would make one recommendation, though, for the agenda and its sequence. I think we have representatives from both CPTA and the Department of Consumer Affairs. We might want to take the Consumer and Professional Associations relations reports out of sequence and do that before the legislative report.
Okay, let's do that. So that would be agenda item number 9. Consumer and Professional Associations and Intergovernmental Relations Reports.
I can take the first one for FSBPT.
Okay.
We don't have a representative with us this time. I actually think we might have a representative with us at the March meeting. So there's that to look forward to. The other part is I will say that both Mr. Quee and Dr. Brandon attended the Delegate Assembly and Annual Education meeting in October. And so I'm going to lean on them for their experiences. I will tell you, for me, it was a great meeting. A lot of content was provided that I think was timely. Some AI courses and things like that, speakers that were, speaking to not just AI in healthcare, but AI in ethics and how it's going to be applied in society, generally speaking. There are opportunities for volunteerism for our board members to serve on certain committees. I know that I might lean on Dr. Ra to speak to her participation in some of those committees. I serve on the Sexual Misconduct and Boundaries Committee currently. And as a result of the annual meeting, I am now also going to be the co-chair of the Council of Board Administrators and serve on the Education Committee. So I got voluntold. The other thing that I would just highlight too is that that Sexual Misconduct and Boundaries Committee also provided a webinar for resources to students on November 6th. It's the first time FSBPT has ever really targeted education training towards students, right? So it was really well received. We had about 500 or 600 folks attendance online, which we were worried was going to crash the system. And there was a little bit of traffic and static, but we got it off without a hitch. But it's something I think that we're going to look at doing on a yearly basis or maybe every 2-year basis moving forward. So we try to catch more cohorts with that information. So, and it's just one of the resource products that committee produced. They also produced resources for licensees and consumers of physical therapy services and even academics, people teaching and providing clinical instruction in the programs. So,
I can speak a little about my experience volunteering and serving with the FSBPT in that it was incredibly enriching. My first experience was on the Foreign Educated Standards Committee, and I served on that committee and then served as chair. And there's so much that we can take from serving and bring to the board and apply to the board and have rich discussions. I also served in other capacities with FSBPT. And again, I think it does help our position as board members to understand more about regulation in other states and how things are done, and understand why things are done a certain way here. And many times it affirms that we're on the right track, and sometimes it helps us to look at what we can do better.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed being a part of the education training from the FSBPT this year and the role as alternate delegate. It was my first experience, and I found it incredibly valuable. Like Dr. R.A. said, that we have an opportunity to see like kind of inside of other states. There's a huge variety. That's the first thing that I noticed in terms of not only, you know, their balance of their board, the experience of their board, but also, you know, term limits and other issues that kind of were highlighted. The content I found was also kind of innovative and frontier pushing. You know, they talked a lot about AI. There were about 4 different sessions on AI and its impact on healthcare, and then even to the point that trying to figure out, are we how is it going to impact different sectors of healthcare, like insurance, education? How are you going to determine how to protect patients' identity? And then how can it actually serve us in terms of being able to put data into formula to do research, and also kind of to predict outcomes for different types of care? So I thought that was fascinating. Of course, also very valuable was the ethical component that was highlighted. There was a lot. Also, the other big highlight was the sexual misconduct, which we're so thankful to have Jason in his role, because that was really great to see everyone utilizing the toolkit, and very, very valuable not patient, it'd be consumer-driven videos on what to expect in physical therapy and what to and how to report issues. That was very well done, Jason. I'm really glad they were able to coordinate that. And one thing that I thought that was very interesting that came up was workforce changes and how it impacts regulation at state boards, and recognizing that, you know, as things shift, if there is a lack of retention, people are burning out. What does that look like in terms of does that create more challenges for the regulatory board? Does that show in terms of like how many people are or aren't passing the NPT? So I think it's fascinating to just kind of stay on top of that, because everything that happens on the education side will, and on the business side of physical therapy, is going to have an impact. And it's nice to be able to anticipate if we see trending occurring. So yeah, it was very, I felt very pleased that I feel the most important places we are leading, and then some areas we could learn a lot about how they're affecting change with regulations that are new. Not every state does dry needling, but different states have different ways to evaluate those things. So that part is going to be very useful as we move forward.
I will say that Sam and Karen got kind of a sneak peek into content that the rest of you will be exposed to here in the near future from the Sexual Misconduct and Boundaries Committee. The videos that were revealed are very close to being released to us. We'll be using them on our website and social media. There is a tool that I'm probably going to be assigning to all of you as homework. which is kind of an audit or an assessment of our own website to make sure that it is content friendly when it comes to consumers and their ability to find a complaint form very quickly, that the language that's being presented to them as part of the complaint process is not dissuading them from, providing a complaint. And so that committee designed a tool with the help of an analyst from HCI or HRI, I'm sorry, under contract to kind of just assess all of the boards across the United States, their websites, and how well they do these kind of things. I will say, I might be biased. I think we're still going to score really well with that assessment, but I am still looking for those fine tweaks, those things that we can just do it a little bit better and we can polish it out even more. That committee to me has been very rewarding. There's a spinoff committee from that committee that is the Informed Consent Committee. I'm not on that committee yet, but maybe someday. But again, I think those are the kind of things that are very consumer driven, right? They're done from very much the right perspective, and we'll support those products wholeheartedly. So you'll see those videos on our website and outreach probably after the first of the year. And then, like I said, you might get homework assignments from me after the holidays. I'll at least wait until after the holidays. Mr. Q?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the conference. Actually, it was a lot of first time experiencing there was some actually debate on continued competency related to licensing, how that whether you pass the exam, that would be the final say on renewal and licensing across the state, etc. And also what made a big impression on me is that how many different topics were related to AI. AI used in the exam, AI used in clinical assessments, AI used in competency evaluations. So a lot of these topics are, to me, very advanced, and it's necessary for us to start. It's a wave that's coming our way that we need to be prepared for, and the sort of a storytelling of technical AIs and related to business issues, clinical issues. Those are the sort of the integration of AI that's going to be utilized, that's coming our ways. And that made a big impression on me. And I think probably put some food for thought for the board to think about that, where we stand in terms of thinking how AI in this state is going to be sort of carried out and implemented.
One of the other things, just planning for the future, is the next annual education meeting for FSBPT is in October of next year, and they plan on being in Spokane, Washington. And I think it'll be the first time that that we request to attend that meeting in person, but also bring more than just the delegate and alternate delegate. There's been some conversation at FSBPT about through the Council of Board Administrators about including maybe investigators or expert consultants with the board so that they can have kind of an insight into that multi-state perspective. Board Legal Counsel, you might be receiving that request to attend. And so just considering and trying to keep in mind what the budget might be like next year at this time too. Having more attendance because it's on the West Coast than just the funded attendee, the delegate and the alternate delegate or the administrator. When we hosted the meeting in Anaheim, because we were local in California, we were able to bring more members and even board staff to attend. We were the hosts, right? I'm hoping Spokane, really, if you think about it, is almost equal distance between here and Los Angeles and Anaheim. So we made jokes at the time that we had traveled further than some of the other states that were in attendance at the time, being Nevada and Arizona. So, so just kind of keeping an eye on the budget letters. This year's budget is supposed to be released on the 10th of January, I believe. And we'll be working with the Department of Finance and Department of Consumer Affairs to kind of look at that, but we'll be planning an out-of-state travel request for October. So I would say one last thing shamelessly, for those board members that may be terming out, that doesn't mean that your participation as a volunteer with the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy necessarily has to end.
I've thought about that.
You could, if you manage to somehow get onto a committee sooner rather than later, you could still be included at the time. Plus, they'll always invite you back based on your reputation alone. So,
Thank you. And I wanted to add also that I would be very supportive of any opportunity for our assistant executive officer to participate.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, I mean, as time is available for that person, yeah, that would.
The idea of additional staff extends past the AEO. I'd also like the managers of each individual unit. I think it's important for them to be able to see that kind of perspective difference from one jurisdiction to another also.
Yeah.
I know in just the experience of having Sam and Karen with me and answering to questions what seemed like all day long, right? And those questions are so, they might seem so elementary, but once you answer those questions, they just broaden your perspective so much in understanding how different California might be compared to another jurisdiction model and how efficient we are actually at what we do based on our economy of scale. We are
Yeah.
the largest state and jurisdiction in the room at the time. We may not be the largest geographically speaking, but we have the highest population density and the highest population out of all the other jurisdictions. So definitely looking at that. Again, attendance for those kind of things, we'll have to make a determination on what we can afford and what will be allowed based on the budget letters at the time.
Another plug for staff attending is often when I would attend such meetings, I would think about how valuable the information presented would be for some staff. And we've actually seen staff from other states attend some of these offerings. So,
Clearly.
yeah, it would be great.
Just another thing, but to say that they haven't benefited from it already, I know that specifically for both Sarah and Carol, when they're still here in California in the office and I'm attending those breakout rooms and I'm asking questions, it's still open and I'm still asking them questions. Look this up, give me this statistic. How does this particular statute read? Where is this in a policy? What have you? So I can report out accurately. And they're always curious as to why I ask what questions I ask when we get back. And so we have a full debrief to say, here's what the conversation was. Here's why I needed that information and why it was important. And now they'll get to experience those kind of things themselves. Anaheim was a really good experience, right? They all got to kind of have that experience and sit in those breakout rooms. And I'm sure that they all got inundated with the same kind of questions that I do about why doesn't California this and why doesn't California that? So absolutely.
Yeah,
Very
I think
valuable.
it makes us a better board, so that we can reassess what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think that helps us in our mission, to protect the consumers of California.
I think for me too, it like broke me out of the silo of just thinking about it one way. Being able to see that there are many ways to address something. And if we ever get stuck, there's an opportunity to look at it differently. How soon does the FSBPT put out the content for the education? Because that might dictate too, like who would be really good to make sure we get there.
I see what you mean. I wish that was a little bit more. I don't envy them having to do it though. I can't.
It's a lot.
It would be a lot to kind of be able to push that out in advance. I want to say it's usually 45 to 60 days in advance of the event that we know what the actual breakout rooms are going to be. Like an example between the three of us is that we divided and conquered. And sometimes we ended up in the same breakout room, right?
Maybe
Sometimes
once.
we didn't. Depending on what that schedule looks like, I usually look at it and say, okay, there might be some logistics that have to be planned here. Like we have to all agree, like we want to hit all three in that hour window. So who gets to do what have you. Sometimes it's important to have us all in the same room for a given topic because it's so relevant to the state of California. So, and like I said, I wish it was a little bit earlier, but we usually know about 2 months in advance of what those sessions are going to be about. The keynote speakers are usually not revealed until about 30 days ahead of time, though.
Okay.
I also wanted to sort of give a little breakout on the business side of FS BPT because I think our state represents a very large portion of that contribution in terms of the revenue for them. And it's probably essential for us to participate in all areas of all the committees, sort of staying on the front of how FSBPT is driving its goals and missions. And they have they actually their size has been increasing throughout the years and becoming a very diverse organization. They have subsidiaries that I set up on doing the research and doing a lot of survey workforce type of analysis. And by staying within those committees and participation, I think it would benefit us in terms of participating in driving the future directions.
I agree, and encouraging that volunteerism. I think I can think probably the finance committee would be a great example for Sam to join, right, with FSBT. FSBPT is very good at being transparent with their budget reports and their monies and how they're spent. But what better, way for us to have a little bit more insight into having Mr. Kui serve on a finance committee with them.
Thank you for the volunteerism.
Okay. I'll send you the application.
It's almost borderline voluntold a few people
Just a
on this
suggestion.
board. Okay. Jason, is that?
I think that's it for FSBPT, unless the members have any further questions.
Okay, Department of Consumer Affairs, DCA, hello.
Testing.
Can you hear me? All right, perfect. Hello and good morning, President McMillan, Vice President Armstrong in her absence, Executive Officer Kaiser, and members of the board. I'm Melissa Geer, Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Relations, and I appreciate the opportunity to share the Department of Consumer Affairs update this morning. Before my updates, I wanted to piggyback on Jason's comments regarding board vacancies and appointments. The governor's office is very much aware of your current vacancy and is actively recruiting for it. The governor's office is aware of the 2 vacancies next year due to the terming out of members Elby and Abina Amin, sorry about that, and looking for good candidates to fill those slots. If you know individuals interested in becoming board members, please encourage them to apply. And then once they've applied, if you shoot me a note or shoot Jason a note to then get to me, then I can let the governor's office know, and hopefully we can pull that application and expedite the process a little bit because, as all of you know, it can be a lengthy one. And so we want to make sure that come next year, you don't have any quorum issues. So it would be helpful if you guys have good candidates, let us know, and we'll do our part to make sure that we get folks appointed as soon as possible to help avoid any issues with quorum or anything like that. And so with that, I will now begin my updates. So first update is regarding the Form 700 filing changes effective January 1st, 2025. Effective January 1st, 2025, board members must file their Form 700 through the Fair Political Practice Commission, or FPPC's, electronic filing system. Filings will no longer be filed via the NetFile portal and must be filed electronically. Paper filings will no longer be accepted. The governor signed AB 1170, Chapter 211 Statutes of 2024, effective January 1st, 2025. AB 1170 requires that a Form 700 filed by a public official or board member for whom the commission is the filing officer must be filed electronically with the FPPC. The FPPC will email board members a welcome email with login credentials by December 31st. Filers can continue to use the NetFile portal before January 1st. Feel free to contact Board and Bureau Relations with questions at memberrelations@dca.ca.gov. DEI update. DCA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee met on October 25th, 2024. The committee elected Reggie Varghese as chair and Marlon McManus as vice chair. With Reggie and Marlon's years of experience and sincere commitment, we greatly look forward to accomplishing many DEI initiatives under their leadership. Next is new unconscious bias training for board members. DCA is updating its current unveiling unconscious bias training to focus on board members, your critical roles, and how unconscious bias can affect your decision-making authority. The training will be self-paced and available in DCA's Online Learning Management System, or LMS. We anticipate launching this new training in early 2025, and board members will be required to take it annually. As a reminder, DCA offers over 20 online DEI training courses on its learning management system. While these courses are not mandatory, board members and board leaders are strongly encouraged to take these trainings as you are instrumental in leading department-wide change. Next, Military Licensing Resources Webinar. To support and maximize outreach to our military community, DCA hosted a second live webinar on November 21st to share information about military licensing resources. During the webinar, attendees learned about licensing resources available to members of the military and their spouses or domestic partners. The webinar featured a demonstration of DCA's federal professional license portal and state registration process and question and answer session. Next, Season of Giving. We are officially in the season of giving, and DCA is honored to join in the annual charity campaigns. We recently had our turkey drive, which was on November 13th. DCA held its annual turkey drive, collecting over 2,000 pounds of food, including 110 turkeys, to help local families in need celebrating Thanksgiving and feed their families through Sacramento-based Joey's Food Locker and the Natomas Unified School District. Donations collected were available to families during Joey's Food Locker Turkey Drive on November 22nd. Last year, DCA's employees were part of the reason 769 families, or 3,315 people, celebrated Thanksgiving and fed their families. DCA was excited to once again make a difference in the lives of others and support the community. The giving spirit will continue, and DCA will join the state employees' food drive and place boxes at various offices to collect non-perishable food items directly benefiting a local food bank. Our Promise campaign launched the State Employees Giving at Work campaign. Every year through the Our Promise California State Employees Charitable Campaign, state employees, including board members, have the opportunity to support the nonprofit causes they are passionate about through payroll giving or one-time donations. These contributions have a positive impact on our communities and is another way for DCA to show it cares for California. This year's campaign is led by Monica Vargas, Deputy Director of Communications, and Karen Navarro, Assistant Deputy Director of Communications. DCA's campaign officially launched on November 18th and runs through December 31st. In the meantime, please contact Board and Bureau Relations with any questions or if you would like information on how you can give. And with that, I again would like to thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for your report. And I want to thank you and DCA and administration for your attention on the vacancy and the vacancies coming up and the invitation to maybe provide some resources or some names for that. And I wanted to ask how the webinar was received, how it was attended.
So I don't have all the specifics on the webinar just yet, but I can get back to you on that. But from what I've heard, it was well attended and was appreciated, which is partly why we had interest to do it again.
Yeah, that's great.
Just wanted to add, excuse me, many of my other clients are getting a lot of appointments right now. So I'm encouraged by that.
I was just about to ask, at every meeting, Jason and the admin staff lets us know it's not just us, it's this and this. Do you happen to know the current vacancy, like average across our, I know that's a crazy question, but they do. They oftentimes provide us and they say, well, these are the other areas that are lacking.
I would say on average.
You can just tell us where our rank is, maybe. Are we at the bottom or the?
I don't think it'll be that easy, actually.
I'm like, that might be a little more difficult. I know it's hard to say, right? Because different priorities come up, not only for us, but for the governor's office as well. And so we'll be pushing and we'll be like, okay, this is our priority and we're going at it strong. And then the governor may have a priority, so that may change. But I will say you guys are top of list. You have been, as many of our boards are. The priorities do shift a little bit, but we're always recruiting for your boards and all of our boards. I think right now we do have vacancies on a good number of our boards. Generally, it's our public members that we have a harder time filling positions for, just because I think public members sometimes don't always think that, hey, I can be an asset to that board, even though I'm not like a licensee or part of the profession. So we are often encouraging individuals to apply as public members for that. And so I would also just say be patient with us. And again, if you know good individuals, just let us know. And there's not one board that reaches a higher priority than others. It just cycles through at different times based on given things.
In an effort to simplify it, I'll probably make it more complicated. I subscribe to the governor's press releases, and I can tell you that the appointment secretary is responsible for making thousands of appointments a year, right, across all of the different state agencies in California. And one of the things I think that is kind of special about this year is we've actually seen the creation of dozens of new councils and dozens of new state departments that all need to be vacancies filled. So, or we can be very single-minded and think about like, what's the vacancy rate across the Department of Consumer Affairs? I would think that the appointment secretary would say, oh, if it were just that simple, right? Like if that's all we had to do was just the Department of Consumer Affairs. So having said that, when I see those press releases come across, obviously I look at them immediately. And sometimes I'll tell you right now, just in this last few days, I was knocking on wood thinking, of course we would get an appointment to our board 2 days before a board meeting, right? Because that's happened. But be careful what you wish for, right? Like you needed members, here you go. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. So, like I said, I think we're getting close to next. And then just from perspective and talking with colleagues at my level, here we are today because of very kind of understandable circumstances where we are just at quorum. I have colleagues that have been just at quorum due to vacancy, right? So I'm not saying we're in the best of shape, but it actually can get worse. So we should be a little thankful for what we have.
Indeed.
Melissa, for our listeners or viewers, can you share the website for folks who might possibly be thinking about applying to be on a board member?
Yes.
So gov.ca.gov will take you to the governor's website, and there is a tab there for application for appointments that the governor makes. Very formal application process, easy to find, easy to do. And the more that we can get of those, certainly the better. For Assembly and Senate appointments, it's a little bit less structured. A lot of it does, maybe have more to do with your political region and constituent base and that kind of thing, where if you know people in those areas that say the Speaker of the Assembly or the Senate committee might have some influence on, please steer them in that direction. And then even if you need assistance in that, I can help you with that as well. So those public members are very difficult to come by.
And so, and also with that, if you have people that go to the site, I recently encountered somebody that said, I went to the site, but the board I'm interested in isn't listed. Still apply.
point.
Again, that's a rolling list that the appointment secretary and her staff are filling and also are updating. And so sometimes there is a lag, but please, even if you're not on that list, apply, identify what board you're interested in. And again, if there are any of your colleagues or friends or acquaintances and they let you know, just let us know and we can work on that as well.
And from experience's sake, I will just say that rolling list continues to be maintained as a rolling list until such time as the governor's administration itself changes. That's usually the only time I've ever seen a necessity to kind of repopulate that appointments list. One last kind of tidbit is that if you happen to know folks that have submitted their application and it's been quite some time since, they have or have not been contacted, as the appointment secretary position changes, sometimes it's a good idea just to resubmit your application, refresh your place on that list, make sure that you're front and center in their mind as a possibility.
You took the words out of my mouth on that one.
Any further comments or questions for Melissa while we hold her hostage? Hearing none. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Next is 9C, our California Physical Therapy Association, CPTA.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you all hear me?
You just might need to bring it closer to you. There you go.
How about now?
Perfect.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for Tamika Island with the California Physical Therapy Association. Thank you for the opportunity to provide updates on behalf of the CPTA today. My first update is more of an FYI. The association was notified by a licensee here in California about a recent piece of legislation in Nevada. And I wanted the board as well as your executive staff to be made aware of this. It is the intent of that legislation to consolidate multiple healthcare related boards. So I'm not sure if you have been informed of this. It is a Nevada-based bill, SB 78, and it is the intent of that legislation to, again, consolidate several of their licensing boards as follows. Going back to the list here. It would be their Nevada Physical Therapy Board, their Nevada Chiropractic Physicians Board, the State Board of Oriental Medicine, the Board of Occupational Therapy, the Board of Athletic Trainers, as well as the Board of Massage Therapy. In looking at that language, I noted that there aren't any provisions within it that will address the unique components of practice related to each profession, which is greatly concerning to the association. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. So as you look to continue to collaborate with the Federation and other boards, perhaps there'll be an opportunity to discuss this. And we, the association, will also be looking into it further.
Tamika, that was SB 78?
Correct. Based in Nevada. My next update is regarding CPTA's intent to introduce legislation in 2025 as it relates to practice modernization. The CPTA Board of Directors recently adopted draft legislation language, and it is our intent, we're actually currently post-election looking for an author to sponsor our legislation. And if we are successful, we hope to introduce that legislation at the first of the year. We will continue to collaborate with your executive staff in sharing draft language. So if it's appropriate, that this board can review it and then be prepared at your first meeting. I believe that's March, when you review it during your legislative report. It is our hope that this board would find no concerns, as we've been working with Jason Kaiser and your executive staff in reviewing the language over the course of this year and talking about some of the concerns that previous iterations of our language had, and hoping to continue to address that as it relates to the protection of the public and our your licensees. Again, it's our intent to hopefully encourage your support of the legislation. And also, if this board is interested in reviewing any of our supporting documentation that supports the various components of practice within that legislation, we do have an electronic version of that supporting documentation. We'd be happy to work with your executive staff to get that to you. My next update is more of an invitation. We are hosting a virtual webinar next Wednesday, December 11th, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. The topic is 2025 employment and practice law updates. Our legal counsel, along with myself, will be serving as presenters on that webinar. If anyone is interested in participating, we'd be happy to assist you with registration so you can participate and be a listening ear on that. My final update is just to, and I saw that it was on your calendar, so thank you for including it. Remind you that the 2025 CPTA annual conference is scheduled for September 20th through the 21st in Palm Springs. We will have an exhibit hall. It will look a bit different. Rather than having your traditional exhibitor booth, we will have sales tables, so smaller venue, but yet would still appreciate and extend that invitation if your staff is available to collaborate with us and be available to our attendees. That would be wonderful. That's all of my updates. I did have a quick question, if it's appropriate, and please direct me if I should wait for an alternate agenda item. But when we were looking at your 2025 calendar, I just had a quick question. Is it appropriate to ask that now, or should I wait for public comment since it was already adopted?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. On your 2025 calendar, I noted that for December, the dates that are listed for your quarterly meeting are December 11th and 12th. I don't know if you addressed this, but down below in the red, it states that the meeting is December 4th and 5th. So I was just hoping to catch or to receive clarification on what the actual dates are.
Thank you for catching that.
You're welcome.
We'll make that correction. As we see it right now, 11th and 12th was what was actually discussed and decided upon. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
We would like to be in attendance, but we have a conflict with the dates of the 4th and the 5th, so that's why I wanted to confirm that. And that's all that I have. I'm happy to answer any questions or take back any feedback from you.
I know you can't mention any names, but do you guys have any authors in mind?
We have a few.
Okay.
Yeah. Nothing formal. So again, we'd rather not state that on record, but we do have some very strong candidates who are who have been and continue to serve as proponents of the physical therapy profession, and but we recognize that what we're proposing is a rather large. It's certainly a robust package, and so it would take a brave legislator to take that on. So we anticipate that it will take some time, continuing to educate a potential author in making them comfortable with moving forward with the package. And then, making sure that they understand that they would be leaning on us to ensure that the evidence-based literature will push the legislation forward and hopefully quell some of the concerns from potential opponents. But we are excited to introduce it, and we're more excited that there's evidence there from the profession that supports the larger components of what we're proposing in this scope expansion bill.
Thank you.
You're
I'm working
welcome.
with the coalition, and we're trying to introduce some legislation. So I know what you guys are going through.
We appreciate
Yes.
that. We appreciate your grace.
It's good to hear that the draft is done, and it's good to hear that there is some discussion between CPTA and our board. And I'm just looking to see if there is opportunity for, more an ad hoc committee or more input from board to look at the document. Not that that's necessary. I'm just looking for your thoughts, Jason.
I think it's certainly an opportunity that the board can decide to take. I think up to this point, the draft being kind of CPTA's proprietary document, while I've been privy to the conversations, it's not something that I've been able to disseminate to you as members or even bring as kind of an informational item for agendas. But now, moving forward into the 2025 session, that is when those conversations should arise. So once CPTA releases that draft document to me, I will release it to you all. And, depending on the gravity of that and the decision-making of the board president, you may see it as for possible discussion and board action agenda item in the next March, June, or September meetings.
Okay. And I really appreciate the idea of the collaboration, the communication back and forth. And so if this is successful, that there would be agreement for both parties to move forward. Yeah.
I mean, it's always our intent to make sure that the association that represents our profession is able to move forward with their author with some of anything that might be considered controversial from a consumer protection perspective already addressed, right? We'd like to deal with that at the lowest level possible. It can get very contentious when it is actually done mid-session, moving from one committee to another. Having a little bit of insight into how optimistic CPTA's bill is, there's going to be some of that anyway. So.
Thank you.
Certainly. It is our intent to share the draft legislation once we receive a formal copy from the California Legislative Council's office. So the language is currently with their office. And once we receive an unofficial copy, we're comfortable with sharing that with Jason Kaiser, who can then disseminate it across your board. We want you to be proactively looking at the language as far out as in advance as possible, because we would anticipate the legislative introduction anytime between January and the deadline in late February.
Having said that, CPTA might consider not releasing the draft to me for dissemination to the members until such time as the author accepts the draft.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying that. That is our intent.
Okay.
Michael Canotes, legal counsel, my recommendation would be that the board, at least the board itself, not look at draft legislation
Right.
until it's introduced.
Right.
But that's
Okay.
all. That's not
That's my point.
inconsistent. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have another question, and I'm not sure who would answer this, but either Tamika or Jason, the webinar that you're having regarding new laws coming up, would that count as 2 hours of ethics
Yes.
in law?
Ethics or law.
Nice.
It has been approved.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments for Tamika? Hearing none.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Tamika.
you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Madam President, might I suggest a bio break?
Yes, that's where I was
Okay,
going.
perfect.
Yes, so that completed item number 9. So we will take 10 minutes and return at, what time is it? 10:40. Now, the meeting has resumed. As I was saying, just a correction that the handout agenda and your book agenda are correct. My mistake. So we are going to move item number 10 on your agenda up next. And so that is DCA Budget Office, a presentation of services.
All right. Good morning. My name is Brendan Vu, and I'm the DCA Budget Analyst for the board. I'm here with my budget manager, Suzanne Balkis. First, I want to thank the board and executive staff for allowing me a few minutes to provide you information on the budget process. As the budget office, our main role is to facilitate the annual budget process for the department for the boards and bureaus. First, I want to go over the annual budget process and how it relates to the board's funds and appropriation. The budget process is a statewide process to how a budget is developed and ultimately enacted into law for state departments to adhere to on an annual basis. The first stage of this process is the development of the governor's budget, which occurs in the fall and released on January 10th. The governor's budget is planned a year ahead. For example, the recent release expected on January 10th, 2005 will be for fiscal year 2025-26. During this stage, we would use your existing budget as a baseline to incrementally adjust it based on instructions provided by the Department of Finance, typically through budget letters. Some examples of adjustments that can impact the board's appropriation are salary and benefit adjustments that occur each year or budget change proposals. For the second stage, once the governor's budget is released on January 10th and introduced to the legislature, the budget office then assists the governor's administration to walk the legislature through the various adjustments that are being proposed. An example of this would be assisting and supporting the board in explaining their BCP if a proposal was submitted. Once the legislature approves the governor's proposed budget, the budget is signed into law for the upcoming fiscal year, which is known as the Budget Act. For example, the current budget was enacted into law in June 2024 per Chapter 22, Statute 2024, Assembly Bill 107. The final stage is the implementation of the budget. All boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs are supported by at least one special fund, physical therapy's general fund being 0759. A special fund is an account separate from the state's general fund in which specified revenue is deposited. The main revenue source for most boards is fees assessed to licensees. Additionally, the board's special fund is the source from which all authorized board expenditures are made. It is also important to note that the board's fund balance is different from what the board is authorized to spend in any given year. As referenced earlier, the board's budget appropriation is the budget approved in the Annual Budget Act, which becomes the appropriation for the corresponding fiscal year. An appropriation is the total amount of funds for which a board can make payments out of their special fund. It is important to remember boards are expressly prohibited from making expenditures in excess of this annual appropriation. It is also important to note any reversions from the board's appropriations, savings from the board's authorized expenditures in the fiscal year, are reverted back to the fund and not rolled over to the next year's appropriation. As a reminder, board members have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure the board maintains expenditures within their authorized appropriation and can do so by reviewing the board's budget reports and expenditure projections on a routine basis. Another role the Budget Office provides is support and guidance on monthly projections to assist the board executive staff in making sound decisions on both annual expenditures to their appropriation as well as maintaining a structural fund balance. Some of the tools the budget offices use are, but not limited to, Qbert, which provides projection and revenue reports, as well as fund condition statements. The board's fund condition and expenditure projection documents are a vital tool to be used by the board members to monitor expenditures and revenue and weigh in on potential financial decisions of the board. A fund condition is a document that provides an overview of the status of a board special fund. This document displays multiple fiscal years and provides a board's past actuals, current year authorized, and budget year estimated revenues, expenditures, and fund balance. This document is used to monitor and project the future health of the board's special fund and determine if the board's fund balance is growing or declining. Using this tool, boards can determine when fees increases may be needed to address declining fund balances, or if fees can be lowered in the rare case that a board's fund balance is growing statutorily below mandated limits. A commonly used metric to monitor a fund's health is months in reserve. This metric takes the ending balance fund for a specific fiscal year and compares it to the board's total authorized expenditures, providing the total months a fund could sustain operations assuming no additional revenue was collected. For example, a fund with 12 months in reserve could sustain operations for a full year without any revenue being collected. A projection is a tool A projection is a tool used to monitor a board's expenditures and revenues throughout the fiscal year and can assist the board in making financial decisions, while also ensuring the board keeps its expenses within their authorized appropriation. These reports are updated on a monthly basis and are regularly provided as an item in board meetings. The budget reports provide board members with an opportunity to see how the board is expending its funds, with all expenses broken out into categories such as salaries, benefits, facility operations, and equipment, just to name a few. A few other functions of the budget office include assisting the board by coordinating legislative bill analysis and regulation package development services, facilitating communication and coordination of information between the board and the state and legislative control agencies, providing various consulting services, including fee analysis, regulation review, BCP review, and assistance on schedules, including out-of-state travel. Those are services specific to the budget office. However, DCA does provide a wide range of centralized administrative services to all boards and bureaus through its two primary divisions. The first is Consumer and Client Services Division, which include human resources, facilities, budgets, contracts, accounting, training, outreach, call center support, and legal services. And the second is Division of Investigation. Division of Investigation provide enforcement services. DCA provides these services to the board by utilizing funds obtained through pro rata, so the board doesn't require its own staff for these activities. The cost of these centralized services are distributed amongst all boards and bureaus utilizing various distribution methodologies, which are based primarily on authorized positions. For example, the greater number of positions would essentially require more admin support, such as HR-related workload and cost. And participation rates, for example, call volume, where more complaint calls are received by the call center, IT usage, the more licensees applying for licensure or renewing, driving higher costs. Or DOI, enforcement investigation activity, where the more cases sent to DOI drives higher enforcement costs related. This year, the Budget Office received 2 budget letters that will impact the board's appropriation. Excuse me. Vacancy Savings and Position Elimination Budget Letter 2420. Department of Finance issued Budget Letter 2420, Vacancy Savings and Position Elimination to reduce the state workforce by 10,000 positions and $1.5 billion, $762 million in the general fund, and $738 million in the special fund. The budget letter 2420 budget reduction will be effective starting 2024-25 and ongoing, while the position eliminations identified will become effective 25-26 and ongoing. Government efficiencies reduction, budget letter 2424. Department of Finance issued budget letter 2424. This budget letter provides instructions to implement the control section 4.05 reduction required in the 2024 Budget Act for the development of the 2025-26 governor's budget. The department is still working with finance to finalize the plans. Nothing has been approved yet, and we will share any updates with the board once we receive it. The budget office will continue to monitor the board's fund condition statement and keep the line of communication with the board's executive staff open for any future needs or expectations. Again, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present at today's meeting, and we would be happy to answer any questions you may all have.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the board?
Just want to thank you for your service and all you do. I really appreciate how you broke all that down. I even took some notes here. I learned some things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the second budget letter number
Yes.
that's impacting us?
So the second budget letter was budget letter 2424, and that would be the government efficiencies reduction.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions, comments from the board?
I know there are. And now is your time. You have budget analysts from the Department of Consumer Affairs sitting in front of you.
Thank you for your time. And one of the question I have is that once the budget is adopted and if there's further deterioration or improvement in terms of revenue perspectives, is there expectation that additional letters are going to be issued to have mid-year adjustments for those budgets?
So I believe you're talking about the May revise, right?
Right.
And so if anything comes from Department of Finance, we will adjust it based on what the budget letter comes, and that will be considered May revise, and then it will have an updated appropriation after that.
So, and just to elaborate on that a little bit, there's basically a structured midway point that is expected in every budget year, and that is the May revise. Having said that, though, there are sometimes emergent situations where budget letters can be drafted even past the May revise in some of the most extreme circumstances. But that May revise, you would expect every year, and that is kind of to adjust for just what you're saying, is that once the budget is adopted from January 10th moving forward, there may be some kind of structures that have to be adjusted for as part of the galley process in building those budgets, that we are able to contribute feedback towards to be considered in the May revise. And then there's a few other tools that could be used for us within our budget for unforeseen cost circumstances and those kind of things. Specifically, a good example that I would give to members is that one of the things that we can't anticipate is how much money we may be required to spend for our enforcement program. Essentially, there's no way to tell how many complaints you might receive or how complex those complaints might be. And with complexity comes cost. We have the authority at that point to augment our line item for enforcement based on what we call an augmentation letter, right, where we can demonstrate our enforcement line item is expected to or has been in the red for a year or two, and we need to pull money from our fund to cover those costs in the current year's budget. So that one's probably the most specific example that I can give you of our ability to kind of adjust based on, and that's so enforcement specific. The other part of it too, for us and for staff and us to kind of anticipate working with budgets is the BCP process and even I guess I would call it an off-schedule BCP process and the spring finance letters. So, and that's just what we're anticipating in growth, what we're presenting. We want to establish a new program or we want to establish a new position authority to bring on additional staff. We would do that through that budget change proposal. And we're in the season for that right now. And the Physical Therapy Board of California is not presenting any budget change proposals at this time. But to your point, if something should happen, some circumstance that requires us to adjust to legislation or adjust to, unforeseen circumstances, we could also introduce a spring finance letter, which is kind of an off-schedule BCP to account for those kind of things, assuming that our ability to pay for them are there.
And we typically, but we, as a budget, we monitor the fund in a monthly basis. So we do expenditure, we work with the board exec to make sure that we are actually not anticipating any, hopefully, negative impacts. And if that is the case or if that happens, then we will try to work disencumber some contracts that the board is not using, or if there is any things that we can cut, then we can cut it. And of course, that is not going to be affecting any the consumer protection.
Got it. The incumbents is passed in its entirety. I mean, the total amount, right? In other words, the incumbents is not on line item budget, right?
So it depends about what the contract. So the encumbrance is the whole entire contract. But sometimes the board does not use the whole entire contract. So for example, if the contract is for 50,000, but the board is only using 15,000, we can disencumber the remaining amount. But when we are doing budget, we are actually budgeting to the whole contract amount because we do not know whether the board is going to be spending to the full contract or not.
Got it. Thank you.
There's even kind of a deeper layer when it comes to contract encumbrance, and that is that the encumbrances can remain accessible for up to 3 fiscal years. So we're talking about maybe contracts that were not expended fully going back to fiscal year 2022. They sit there because you never know when you might receive an invoice for services rendered at that time, right? Sometimes people don't bill as effectively as they should. It's annoying. But they might come in and roll in after the fact, and those monies are reserved, still sitting in that contract. We can look at the likelihood of whether we're going to ever receive a demand against that encumbrance. And if we know that really, no, we're not going to, we might, with the help of budgets, utilize those monies to pay for things that are happening in our reality today. Once that 3-year fiscal period expires, though, those monies then roll into the fund.
And the board's authority is to recommend to move those? I mean, the board cannot unilaterally move the line items, can it?
We would have to make very specific requests along with budgets and the Department of Finance for them to be approving of whether or not that's appropriate.
Okay.
So just briefly, a lot of this is also controlled by the Budget Act, the Annual Budget Act, that will have all the different lines of appropriations for all of the state. Everything the state does is going to have an appropriation for it. But they also have plus sections in the budget bill that allow the Department of Finance to basically make changes within a certain dollar amount throughout the year to allow budgets to be increased or decreased if that's necessary. It usually doesn't happen here. That's usually more of a general fund trend. And the other issue in terms of budget shortfalls is those really are not impacted in the special funds that constitute the Department of Consumer Affairs. And the governor's office, regardless of that, requires us to cut funds even though we're not short on funds for any reason, because we rely on fees from licensees as opposed to general tax dollars, other sources, revenues from realignment, and federal funds. That's pretty much the whole state budget right there.
Got it. Thank you.
We're fairly fortunate in the sense that we're well mapped out. Our budget display that we provide to you is a very accurate representation of how monies are actually spent. You don't see us in the red in too many different categories. And if we are, there are always other line items that we may be, under expending that we utilize for those costs. Bottom line budget, though, is we've always been, very conservative in the sense that we revert anywhere from 5 to 13% of our budget annually. I guess the only thing that I would say, Brendan's presentation that I liked about it was that he used 12 months as kind of the standard for months in reserve. And I'm not quite there yet, but that's kind of my sweet spot. I want a double-digit fund reserve, right? Because you can never really, like I said, you can't anticipate what's going to happen. In my tenure with this board, I've actually experienced a 3-week fund condition, and that's very nerve-wracking. So I'd like to get, back to like 12 months. And so some of that will be with, this might be helped with the budget letter and the 8% reduction, because I don't predict any reduction in our revenues. In fact, it just continues to grow year after year. So for me, it's kind of like, I like that, right? The fund condition will just become healthier. We won't have to raise fees. I will tell you, as a bucket list on before I retire, one of the things I want to do is reduce a fee or eliminate a fee entirely. That's on my list to do. We just haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. So,
And just to add to that, the manner in which the state budgets and does those year after year comparison in terms of what the reserves will be, how many months of reserves, they keep certain data in the current year and they forecast out with that amount, which I think is the
straight line.
Yes.
Straight line
revenue.
Straight line predictions and projections are. I'll let you get.
For the revenue part, we actually work with the board on estimating what the revenue is going to be. So if we're seeing a trend of an increase, that's what we try to project on. But after a certain point, which is budget year +1, it is going to be static. So it is going to be what we're projecting to be before. For the expenditure line item, we always try to project 3% increase because of all of the general salary increases that we receive, any employees comp, retirement, any adjustments that we receive, we try to put about 3% on there. So to anticipate any anticipation. So that's what we are doing with the fund condition. And if I can answer also the question regarding separate line items for the projections, when we're looking at it as a budget perspective, we're looking at the bottom line item. So if you are not exceeding your appropriation, we are not concerned about each line item individually, because you're still in the green. We're not seeing any red. You might see that each individual line item, but that is just sometimes is based on what either the board we thought that is going to be, or we put that amount historically into that line item, but that's not necessarily going to be impacting your board. So it's not going to be like, okay, reduce this and increase that line item. It's just we're looking at the bottom.
Got it. We appreciate the flexibility on that.
Well, that level of.
Oh, go ahead.
That level of consideration for line item is really left for myself and Liz Constancio, the manager of the admin unit, where we're really trying to display our actuals, right? We want to be as transparent as possible on how the money is spent. And so even if you see something on our displays currently that's in the red, and you can rest assured in the explanation that we've underexpended those same monies somewhere else in the budget display, we're also looking at whether or not that needs to be adjusted permanently or, moving forward, right? And so, but I appreciate budget's explanation that for you guys, it comes down to the bottom line, which it does for us as well, right? So, but we are looking at the line by line because, it really helps us determine costs and savings, potential savings moving forward. If there are things that we can afford to do and the way that's distributed, we know that, if I plan on underexpending a specific line item, maybe I can be a little bit more generous with the allocation in something that is really, needing that attention in the immediate future.
And just to contrast those two situations, we do not need Department of Finance authority, and we don't need to use that provision in the Budget Act at all if we're not changing the appropriation. If we're just changing line items, we don't need that, and that's sort of the big difference, excuse me. And just back to the budgets, I'm certainly not saying the out years are wrong, but they're based on numbers that are likely going to change between now and then, and you just need to read that in context when you review those fund statements.
So,
Okay.
I was just going to clarify for myself. So the budget office is the macro view and we have the micro view.
It's a good
And
way
our
to
micro
describe it.
view is capable of making adjustments to improve and become more efficient and
When
make
we-
decisions that we can predict or we can.
When we consider any kind of adjustments to the micro, though, we do work in consultation with budgets to make those adjustments. Right. So we want that consensus, in that decision-making process moving forward. Just one other thing about like projections. I think the important part for us to consider is when we show you that the fund condition display, and you see budget year out 1, 2, 3, that fund condition is diminishing slowly over time. One thing just to consider in that is that those projections of revenues received are straight line based on what we have received over the last 3 years. We're not anticipating growth there. We're using a very conservative approach saying, this is our worst case scenario. We know we can rely on this. We can say internally, at least for staff and I, that we know the licensing population is growing, and with that growth comes additional renewal revenue. And so those fund condition numbers that look like they're diminishing are not as alarming to us because we're using very conservative projection methods to begin with. To Budget's point, though, when we anticipate expenditures, we all know that we're going to see increases from one fiscal year to another. And I mean all of us in our own personal lives with inflation and overhead costs and rent and utilities and labor and all of those kind of things. It's reasonable to expect those costs to at least increase by 3%. And sometimes we even have to anticipate more than 3% given circumstances. So the fund condition is a good place to look at the health of a board, but there's still a little bit more story behind the scene.
So just, and also to add for the revenue part, so we do reassess the revenue every fall, and we work with the board. So every fall, every time that you're seeing a new government budget, you are going to see the numbers changes. So when the budget releases on January 10th, that revenue is going to change because we reassess every fall because, of course, like you said, there is an increase in population or sometimes there is even a decrease. It can go either way, and we need to capture all of that, and we capture it in a yearly basis. So that numbers will change. Another thing about the budget line item, we're actually working right now. One of the part of our project is to try to fix that budget line items to try to see how it is going to be with what the usage is what's happening. Once we do that, we actually still have to send it to Department of Finance. They do not need approval, but it needs to go through the Department of Finance as a BBA. And then once that is approved before January 10th, then we will be able to have that new adjustment. So maybe after January 10th, you're going to see that budget line item budget is changed because we're basing it on, we're trying to finish to have our worksheets and Hyperion from DOF actually matching together. So that's what we have been working on for the past month. So your numbers is going to change, and when you see January 10th, you're going to see projections a little bit different, and your actually fund condition is going to be a little bit different in the revenue.
From our perspective and from members' perspectives, the more apparent way that's actually going to, how would I say that? It's going to be obvious to you is that assessment that they're doing in the fall might also have to do with an increase in our budgetary authority, right? So every year our budget either goes up or down. This year it went down a little bit, and that's going to affect that straight line projection of revenues received moving forward. And so that kind of fall reassessment, if you will, of where the fund condition is, it's expected to see a variance. That variance is coming from that new assessment of what your budgetary authority is.
I guess it's good to hear that the both revenue side and the expenditure side are tracked on a monthly basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
generally speaking, on our side of things, I know that budgets is really more concerned about the bottom dollar at the end of a fiscal year. I'm looking at a quarterly, even a month-to-month basis to make sure that we're not living outside of our means. Right? That, for me, that's the alarming, and that's just my own business management, if you will. Right? So I want to make sure that, and I think there was a question in the September meeting about applications revenue received that dipped down a little bit. But when we get to that report, I think you'll see that it's just a matter of when the data was collected, because the very next quarter it goes back up. It's just when the data was, it's anomalous in the sense of when it was collected. But that's a good example of that also.
And we also personally track that too, try to see trends and try to see, because sometimes we see like an increase in July and August comparing to other time of the month and that's of the year. And that's what we try to take into account. So if we see a dip and we're like, okay, most likely there is something that is going to be in the following months that we're going to see hopefully an increase. So we keep the monitoring the expenditure and revenue.
Looking back at the September meeting, one of the things that I just wanted to kind of bring up in this discussion is that it's kind of typical to expect almost like a rebound in quarter one. State typically kind of shuts down towards the end of a fiscal year. They limit spending, they limit the collection of invoices and the issuance of payments and those kind of things for about the last, well, it used to be like 30 days and now it's kind of 45 and even 60 days in advance of the close of the fiscal year. And all that really does is stop that processing until the new fiscal year opens up, and then we address all of that in quarter one. So you'll see kind of a slump in quarter four stuff. You can expect it to kind of pick back up in the quarter one reports, and that's one. The applications was a good example of that as well.
Got it.
Can you share what's included in pro rata?
Yes. So included in pro rata, you mean how we calculate it or everything, all of the services included? All the services. So some of the services we have is human.
Both.
Oh, okay. So we have human resources, facilities, budget, contracts, accounting, training, outreach, call center, support, and legal services. That's to name a few. And the way that we are actually calculating it, there's two different set of ways. One is based on authorized positions. So, of course, if you have more positions, you are going to be needing more support, whether it is from HR, a budget, call center, and that way we're calculating it based on, that is based on usage. But if your authorized position, if it is higher positions, then you need more support. And the other one is the usage, which is the call center, about how many calls the call center is receiving. And then GUI is how many cases that they are actually working on. So that's being calculated. So if we have the enforcement and investigation activities, that the more cases that they send to the GUI, then the enforcement cost will be increasing.
And as Jason stated earlier, though, but you cannot have a set number. You can't determine the number of cases that are going to come in.
So I'm just going to interject. I kind of know where this part's going. It's really, this one's one of the harder ones to understand when it comes to pro rata. One of the ways I would explain it is that, and Michael touched on it a little bit earlier, is that this board is a special fund board. It survives and utilizes funds received for both applications and renewals of licensure. We don't receive any California taxpayer money. We survive solely on those revenues that we receive from our applicants and our licensees, and a little bit of cost recovery from enforcement cases and that kind of thing. Having said that, the Department of Consumer Affairs survives solely on these pro rata costs. They are comprised of proportional costs divided amongst the 38 boards and bureaus based on their size or their use of certain services, right? And so position authority is a really good example for human services where they're dealing with hiring and firing and those kind of things. And the more position authority we have, obviously the proportion of those costs is in ratio. But enforcement's the harder one, right? D of I, being part of pro rata services provided by the Department of Consumer Affairs, has two calculations. One being based on position authority, but the other one are invoiceable costs, actual services rendered. And because you can't predict how much enforcement costs you have, they utilize what's called a 2-year roll forward method. And I understand it, but I'm not sure that I'm able to articulate it very well. I've tried on a number of occasions and I've botched it really bad. It's essentially the last 2 years worth of your data and costs is how the Division of Investigation is able to determine what its budget's going to be for the next fiscal year. Now, having said that, depending on how your enforcement caseload works, they might budget for a certain expenditure for your particular board based on trend data over the last 2 years, but you might exceed that or even under expend it. And so it's kind of this rolling, fluctuating 2-year roll forward method. It works very nicely. It means that a board that may not necessarily have in its budget this year the ability to pay those funds, they don't have to. They've already been budgeted for the 2 previous fiscal years' projection. It will roll into the next fiscal year, and they might see their costs kind of move forward from that point. So it allows a little bit more flexibility for boards to be able to shoulder any unanticipated costs when it comes to investigations. The one place that doesn't happen is with the Attorney General's office. So those are invoiceable costs have to be paid within the fiscal year that they're received. And that can be, and that's what I was speaking to, where if those costs exceed your line item budget, you have the authority in legislation to augment that line item, meaning going and reaching into that fund condition to pay for those unanticipated costs to the Attorney General or the Office of Administrative Hearings, the judiciary side of, or the quasi-judicial side of it. Luckily for us, our displays are very much in alignment with what we actually see and have seen over the last few years. And I have no concerns or expectations of changing those line items anytime in the future. Please feel free to correct
Thank
any
you.
of that if it
No,
was.
and I was just actually going to add that when we are looking at the budget, that's one of the things that when we were saying that we're not looking at each budget line item by itself, the only two that we're actually looking at is AG and OAH. Because like Jason said, if you exceeded that amount and then you're in the negative, we cannot just right away go and request an augmentation if your also bottom line is in the negative. So your total, you're spending above your appropriation, and it's due to an AG and OAH or an OAH cost, then we will ask for an augmentation. And that's going to be a one-time augmentation for that specific year. So we cannot ask for an augmentation for the following year because we do not know what's the case is and what's going to happen and what the amount is.
Jason, did you say that our pro rata for HR is in proportion to the number of positions that we have?
That's correct.
Well, and that makes sense. And so what about how we're charged for things like facilities, outreach, and that sort of thing?
Those are both based on position authority as well.
Yes. Not on usage?
So there is a portion of the OIS, the Office of Information Services, that deals with kind of the tech side of things, that is based on transactional data. How many, as an example, through Breeze, how many transactions do you run through Breeze every year and what volume? That's how those pro rata calculations are determined. Not on the PY of things, but on the number of transactions that your board or its profession runs through that electronic system, which is, I think, a better way to do that calculation.
Yeah.
Pro rata, like I said, is kind of a generally difficult concept to kind of wrap your head around. If you just think about it a little bit past that point, though, there's really no other ways to shoulder a centralized services unit over 38 boards and bureaus and fund it without using this kind of in ratio mathematics, like trying to make sure that the larger boards pay their portion, the smaller boards pay their portion, so on and so forth.
Thank you.
I was interested in understanding the call center determination because I wanted to know, like, which calls are coming in to the greater DCA versus coming directly to us? Is that, I mean, because our intention would be that people immediately get, that's why we renovated our website and made ourselves more accessible.
Call center participation is a little bit different from board to board. Some boards utilize call center for all public-facing communications. They have a really high volume. We don't.
Yeah, I didn't
However,
think so.
we don't use the call center. We rely on our staff to shoulder those calls. However, there is a small portion of call center that needs to be passed on to us because there's a good possibility that a consumer
Doesn't know how to get to us.
does not know how to get to us, and those calls may go to them. The other part for the call center too is that generally speaking, like the definition of consumer affairs, you may be getting calls that aren't related to any of the 38 boards or bureaus. And DCA is tasked in that call center with shouldering some of those calls and even providing resources to those callers. And we shoulder some of those uninvoiceable, directly invoiceable costs.
So there's a
kind of in a-
percentage each board
correct.
covers for
That's
just
based on
having
RPY.
access. And then, but in terms of like tallying which questions are supposed to be sent to who, that's the number that our pro rata is based on.
Right. And if this board chose to utilize the call center, we would enter into a contract with the call center where those costs become more invoiceable to us because they know when those calls are coming in that they're physical therapy board related calls. We've used call center resources in the past when we've had shortage in staff and those kind of things.
Okay.
I don't anticipate doing it in the future, but you never know where this profession might go in the future. Like volume is everything at that point. And if the volume was such that it could not be shouldered by the existing staff, the call center would definitely be an alternative to consider.
Thank you.
Any further comments, questions from the board?
Only appreciation to Board Member Sam Q for his insightful questions, and we're leaning on you with your expertise. And another thanks to Jason for sometimes staying up at night thinking about this stuff and keeping us on track.
And thanks to you both for, I got to talk about one of my former jobs. I used to, with my colleagues, of course, in the Legislative Services Division, I used to write the Budget Act.
Well, thank you all for enlightening me on the process because it certainly is not it's a process that takes some time to really grasp and give us confidence that at least that from our board perspective that we know what to expect and things are, they're watchful eyes that aside from us, right? So, yeah.
I guess the only thing I'd add is just a thank you to the budget office at DCA and their staff for just kind of general information. The Department of Consumer Affairs as a client services agency is such a unique model in state government to have to do the math to try to, assist the 38 boards, bureaus, and commissions with everything they do. It's a lot to have to keep track of. And again, every service that's provided has its own kind of unique calculation and billing and how to build DCA's budget moving from one fiscal year to another, that I'm sure that DCA budget staff are in high demand when it comes to moving from this office to another state office because they don't have to deal with these kind of extreme calculations moving from one budget year to another. So from us to you, thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you all.
Nice job.
Thank you. You made all of us feel a little bit smarter today. Any public comment? Hearing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I think that we are going to take a prolonged lunch. And when we return, we will pick up with agenda item number 8. And also closed session. So, yeah,
So we have the executive units report out, and then closed session. So reconvene at 1 p.m.?
that sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay,
And then find DCA.
we're back in motion, everyone. So I am calling this meeting back to order at 1:00 p.m. And we are going to pick up where we left off, and that would be agenda item number 8, executive services update. And so we'll start with 8A, our legislation report. Brooke?
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, members. I'll start by saying that the 2023-24 legislative session wrapped up on September 30th, and all bills that were chaptered go into effect January 1st, 2025, unless they had an urgency clause. The legislature is scheduled to reconvene for the 2025-26 legislative session on January 6th. So for the prior session, Governor Newsom took action on approximately 1,200 bills, and the veto rate was at about 16%, which is on par for previous years. As you can see on the chart on page 30 included in the materials, there were about 681 legislative impacts to the BMP code, which was the most of any other code. So there were about 9 bills that remained on our watch list going into the final part of the session. Of those 9 bills, 5 died, 2 were vetoed, and 2 were chaptered and will go into effect on January 1st, 2025. So I'll go ahead and go through the legislative summary, which begins on page 35 of the meeting materials, and I'll go through the bills in greater detail. I'll start by addressing the 5 bills that died. The first bill was AB 814, Veterinary Medicine Animal Rehabilitation, and this bill did not pass out of the Senate BMP committee. The next bill was AB 2289, Vehicles, Parking Placards, and Special License Plates for Disabled Veterans and Persons with Disabilities. And this one also died as it was held in the Senate Appropriations Committee. The next bill is AB 2269, Board Membership Qualifications, Public Member, and this Public Members. And this one also died as it was held in the Senate BMP Committee. The third bill that died was AB 2862, DCA, African American Applicants, which was also held in the Senate BMP Committee. And the last bill that died from our watch list is AB 3127, Reporting of Crimes, Mandated Reporting. And the board did take an opposition position on this bill at our June meeting, and this bill was also held in the Senate Appropriations Committee. Okay, so I'll be moving on to the 2 bills that were vetoed by the governor, and I did include the veto messages from him in the meeting materials. The first bill that was vetoed was AB 2725, Teachers Credentialing, Physical Therapy, and the board did take a support position at the June meeting on this bill as well, and it was vetoed on September 27th. The second bill vetoed was SB 1067, Healing Arts, Expedited Licensure Process, Medically Underserved Populations. And this bill was also vetoed on September 27th. And then we will go on to the 2 bills that were signed into law and will take effect on January 1st, 2025. The first is AB 796, Athletic Trainers. And this is a title protection bill, which prohibits a person from identifying themselves to others as an athletic trainer, or from using titles such as certified athletic trainer, licensed athletic trainer, or registered athletic trainer, or any other terms to imply or suggest that the person is an athletic trainer unless they meet prescribed requirements. AB 796 was chaptered on September 29th. The second bill signed into law is AB 1991, Licensee and Registrant Records, and this bill was chaptered on September 22nd. This bill requires a licensee or applicant who electronically renews their license or application to provide their individual national provider identified number if they have one at the time of renewal or registration. And in regards to the implementation for AB 1991, DCA's Office of Information Services will be making the necessary changes to the HCI survey to implement the provisions of this bill on behalf of all DCA boards and bureaus. And that concludes my legislative summary, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on behalf of the board.
Thank you for including the veto language. That was very helpful.
I had a question on the AB 1991. There are no rulemaking requirements for us. It's not related to us. It's going to be something that's happening on the front end.
Correct, there's no regulatory issues that need to be done with that bill.
Thank you, Brooke. Any further questions from the board? Comments? Any questions or comments, public comments?
Maybe just a little bit more information regarding Dr. Brandon's question about 1991. Currently, as part of your electronic license renewal, there is a HCI survey that you fill out that asks a number of different questions, but all of those questions give you the opportunity to choose not to answer. 1991 takes one of those questions in particular, the MPI question, and no longer allows for the decline to state or choose not to answer. You will have to provide it.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Jason. Any public comment? Hearing none.
All right, just one more comment about a bill.
Okay.
AB 814, animal physical therapy, obviously made no headway in this last legislative session, but I do anticipate that being reintroduced in this next legislative session. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we were summoned to the Capitol, to the Business Professions Committee, for a consult with all of the relevant stakeholders. So I went on behalf of this board. The next time that we go, I will probably be asking board chair to go with us. The CPTA, the California Physical Therapy Association, and a few of their representatives were in attendance. The CVMA, the California Veterinary Medical Association, was also in attendance. The Animal Rehab Coalition was in attendance, and the California Veterinary Medical Board was in attendance. And so hour-long discussion, a little bit back and forth. BMP is, essentially doing some preliminary research to try and determine what might be a good remedy for this perceived, issue between two practices. And I would think that we will probably be having a number of stakeholder meetings in the future, especially in the latter part of January and early part of February, before a bill could possibly be introduced in just consultation. And in that case, I might ask a board member to attend with me.
Just asking, was there at the FSBPT, when you guys attended that, was there any conversation at all about this?
There was. One of the recent additions to FSBPT's Model Practice Act is language that pertains to the regulation of physical therapy services being rendered to animals. So that is definitely something that's going to contribute to the conversation. In fact, it's already been brought up by those relevant stakeholders. So to answer your question, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, thank you, Brooke. So now we will move on to 8B, rulemaking.
So I want to direct you to the meeting materials on page 41. I did include a newly improved flow chart that was provided by our DCA's regulatory unit, and it just depicts the 4 stages of the regulations process. So for our continuing competency regulations, we are in the first phase of that chart, the concept phase of the regulatory process. And this is just the phase where we're researching, collecting data, and working on proposed amendments to the existing continuing competency regulations. So we are anticipating bringing proposed language and amendments for consideration by the board at our upcoming board meetings in 2025. And this will occur, once our workload studies and analysis are complete and we're ready to proceed with that initial rulemaking process and package. So I will be addressing the timeframes a little bit more in detail under agenda item 8C, which is the proposed 2025 rulemaking calendar.
I like this. It's a pretty flow chart.
Yeah. How do you like it? I love it because it just really, kind of maps it out for us, shows us all the different types of processes, and it also shows what goes into the concept phase and how much research and, workforce studies and all the kickoff meetings that, are required to proceed with the initial rulemaking package, which I think sometimes you don't see how much work actually goes into that.
As a board member, I think this visual is pretty valuable because I have always appreciated the flow chart that we've used. And I think in the past, we've even moved away from it and then went back to it again. But having it set up in 4 phases with bullet points seems to be pretty simple to follow.
And because the document was adopted by the regulatory unit within DCA, we're going to use the 4 phases as a way to identify, even in our own charts, the progress notes so that we can kind of correlate between the two. Obviously, we're going to be more familiar with where we are in the processes as far as maybe some of concept is still unfinished and we're already into production kind of thing, but in those two kind of intermesh. So we'll use that in our visual, but I think this is a really good explanation just for any audience that might be looking at our materials, consumers or licensees or stakeholders alike. This, we haven't gotten to it yet, but when we get to the rulemaking calendar, I'll touch on it a little bit more. Essentially how we determine what the rulemaking calendar was. So I'll wait for that part.
You said that the regulatory unit actually came up with this. Kudos to them.
Yes.
I think on page 43, I can take those dates and find where it falls in this outline, which I really like the model because, again, very conceptual, but noting that you've included a 15-day comment period and all that stuff. So when I look at, say, the subject, continuing competency, projected public hearing date, right? There's something listed and then projected adoption by the agency. All of that is here, and that's great. That'll be something that we can always then just put the dates in as we're going through one project.
Yes, and there are so many steps to the regulatory process. It's nice to have something where you can track it and see where we are, with the total and where, how far we have to go and how much we've accomplished as well.
Any questions, comments from our board members? Jason?
I'm waiting for you to move to sub C.
Any public comment? Moving on to 8C, discussion and possible board action on the 2025 rulemaking calendar.
So as we've already touched on a bit, all agencies are required to annually submit a calendar of anticipated regulatory changes and the time frame in which they expect to submit those changes to the Office of Administrative Law, OAL, which then allows OAL to prepare for anticipated workload for the upcoming year. Therefore, at each December meeting, the board does adopt a proposed rulemaking calendar, which sets forth our rulemaking plan for the upcoming year, and this calendar is published by OAL. So for the 2025 proposed rulemaking calendar, we'll be focusing on our continuing competency regulations, which were included in our 2024 proposed rulemaking calendar and also in previous years as well. I did provide a handout in front of you of a new proposed 2025 calendar in lieu of the calendar included in the meeting materials, as we did change some of the projected regulatory dates for hopefully earlier implementation for both proposed CC regulations in 2025. I just wanted to note there are 2 schedules on there. There's the Schedule A, which is the proposed regulations implementing statutes enacted during 2024. And this is where we would normally identify if we needed to promulgate any regulations for any legislation that was passed in 2024. similar to what we were just discussing with the MPI. If we would have had to promulgate regulations, we would have put it here. And since we are not going to be promulgating any regulations for 2025 regarding any legislation passed in 2024, we're not going to be including anything in this section. So then moving to Schedule B, these are proposed regulations implementing statutes enacted prior to the year 2024. This is the section where we identify any proposed general rulemaking, meaning adding, repealing, or amending any existing regulations. And under Schedule B, we are proposing to include the continuing competency regulations, and we are anticipating those to continue to be two separate regulatory packages. The first package will address proposed amendments to our existing continuing competency regulations. And we did list on there with a projected adoption date, which this is the date that means the language would be adopted by the board, of December 2025. A projected public notice date of March 2026, and then a projected 2 OAL for review date of September 2026.
Excuse me. I swallowed wrong. But this is where I was going to comment. So, the idea of the rulemaking calendar is essentially to help OAL anticipate what the flow of regulations is going to be. And we've had, the continuing competency regulations on the calendar for a number of years. And so there was a much heated debate amongst staff and myself about take it off the calendar, keep it on the calendar. If you keep it on the calendar, it looks like we're not doing anything. If you take it off the calendar, it's going to look kind of weird because it's been on the calendar for so long. What happened to it? You know, so on and so forth. So the new guidance that was provided to you with like the phases of promulgation of regulation by the regulatory unit, I think helps quite a bit too. The continuing competency regulations themselves, the first package that we're talking about amending the actual CC regulations for commonality, things that we've identified would be better or act or serve better to the licensees and consumers, is its own package. And then there's a larger kind of heftier package, which is how the continuing competency program is intended to fund itself based on that statutory authority to collect fees from either licensees, providers, or recognized approval agencies. The collection of fees and allowing that program to fund itself is a much greater venture into research, right? So that's the kind of holdup. Should it be on the 25 calendar or should it be on the 26 calendar? Do we take it off? Do we put it on? I think it's much better transparency wise to the public, to the stakeholders involved, to leave it on the calendar. Staff are still researching, staff are still trying to find those solutions and trying to anticipate the measures of how to establish what a fee might look like. And there is always a possibility that language for either one of the packages could possibly be provided in the calendar year of 2025. We can anticipate that it's going to happen early in 26, but you know, if resources provide themselves, that kind of thing, maybe we should leave it on the calendar. And so we've decided to leave it on the calendar, but I thought explanation was probably warranted to describe some of the expected dates and why.
So Jason, are you saying that staff is anticipating that they probably cannot do both at the same time?
Work is going to be done on both packages at the same time.
Yes.
But assuming that they're both going to complete at the same time is a no, right? I don't think that that's a good expectation, but it's not to say that that it might not happen, right? Because that's the other thing, is that one package might move slow enough that it can then be included with the other. I think the thing that I want to emphasize the most about the schedule itself is projected. Even OAL is saying, what do you guys anticipate? What are you planning for? And to the best of our knowledge, these are the projected dates we're trying to keep a very kind of optimistic view of the schedule. We want to do it as much as anyone. One, to benefit the licensees and the consumers, but even to alleviate, some of the renewal and fund condition issues by having a program that statutorily is authorized to fund itself, actually fund itself.
I make a motion? I move to adopt the 2025 rulemaking calendar as required by Government Code, Section 11017.6.
Second.
Any comment? Hearing none, let's take a vote.
Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
Dale Armstrong. Dale Armstrong is absent. Karen Brandon,
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby. Katarina Ellaby is absent. Sam Q,
Aye.
Alicia Beneman,
For,
I don't think we did.
no, we didn't. Sorry. Start all over. Any comment from the board? Any public comment? Now. Vote.
okay. Tanya McMillian,
Aye.
Dale Armstrong. Dale Armstrong is absent. Karen Brandon,
Aye.
Katarina Ellaby. Katarina Ellaby is absent. Sam Q,
Aye.
Alicia Beneman.
Aye.
4-0, motion carried to adopt the 2025 rulemaking calendar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we will move on to 8D, Communication and Education Update.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is April Boshaw. I'm the Communication and Education Liaison within the Executive Services Unit. And today I will be presenting the outreach report. So for the website in fiscal year 24-25, quarter one, the PTBC had 72,964 web hits through its website page tabs that resulted in a 10% increase from last fiscal year, quarter one. In Facebook, the PTBC received 36 likes this fiscal year, quarter one. And in comparison to last fiscal year, quarter one, there was a decrease of 14% in page visits and a decrease of 15% of page reach. And then this fiscal year, quarter one, the PTBC had a 4% increase in page reach for Instagram and a 54% increase in profile visits in comparison to last fiscal year, quarter one. And then moving on to TikTok, for fiscal year 2024-25, quarter one, the PTBC had 1,958 new video views or impressions. This did result in a 36% decrease compared to last fiscal year, quarter one. TikTok also had 40 new followers and 30 new likes this quarter.
Which was a 173% increase.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Jason. And then when looking at X stats for fiscal year 24-25, the PTBC had a decrease of people reached by 398% and a 33% increase in page engagements compared to last fiscal year, quarter one. Twitter also had one new follower this quarter. LinkedIn had 2,089 page reach impressions, resulting in a 70% increase compared to last fiscal year, quarter one. And LinkedIn also had 47 page visits, which resulted in a 48% decrease compared to last fiscal year, quarter one, as well as 36 engagements, and that resulted in a 64% increase compared to last fiscal year, quarter one. For quarter one, for outreach workshops and webinars, the PTBC provided 7 in-person and virtual outreach workshops to PT and PTA programs. And then PTBC also attended the 2024 annual California Physical Therapy Association conference on September 21st and the 22nd. So although these next outreach events that I'm going to talk about, they did not happen during quarter one, but during our current quarter, which is quarter two, I'm excited to announce that we have started providing outreach to high schools. The PTBC was invited to a career fair in Antioch, California on October 22nd. On October 23rd, we had the opportunity to visit Arthur A. Benjamin Health Professions High School in Sacramento, California. And then on November 13th, the PTBC attended a career fair at Luther Burbank High School in Sacramento, California. Although these were all high school events, they were very different in the way that they were set up. So the one in Antioch, it was for the whole Antioch school district. They had us in a multi-purpose room, and we had like a table and booth type setup, and all the students and their parents were able to come and walk through and talk to us. So that was fun. And then the second one with the one at the Health Professions High School, this one we went into a classroom and provided a presentation to 2 different classes. So we did one class and then we did the same presentation right after to the second class. And then Luther Burbank, this one was a little bit different too. It was also a career fair, but the way they had it set up is we went into 6 different periods, and then we provided the presentation to each of those different periods. And we found that throughout it, even though it was the same presentation, we were constantly changing it after each period based on what the feedback we got back during that presentation. So that was different. I do want to point out, though, that naturally while doing this, we did provide consumer outreach too, because, for example, with the one in Antioch, we had parents there too. And there was a few parents and students that had come up to us and said that they were seeing a physical therapist, they'd been to physical therapy. So we were able to explain like that side of it. And, you know, if you ever needed to file a complaint, this is what you would do and we're who you come to. So we were able to provide that as well. And same thing with the students too, because we would tell them, do you guys know what a consumer is? And then if they did, or if they didn't, we would tell them and explain that to them. And also have them or any of their loved ones been to physical therapy or seen a physical therapist. And again, if you ever needed to file a complaint, you come to us. So we were able to kind of tap into that as well. Overall, like Jason said earlier, it was a great learning experience, not only for the students, but for us. And we're continuing to try to get out there what they want. High school's a very different realm than applicants that are already in a physical therapy program trying to become a physical therapist. It's a lot different, but it's fun. They're so young and they have their whole lives ahead of them, and they're excited and they want to know, well, how do I do this and how do I do that and what do you guys do? I remember the first one we did, I was explaining, we make sure our highest priority is consumer protection. And the girl was like, what is consumer protection? So it was a lot of like having to change our words around to speak to them in a way that they would understand, but it was interesting and fun. And then lastly, the newsletter. The next one will be out soon. It's getting beautified with DCA's publication design and editing right now. So hopefully we'll be getting that back soon, and it'll be out on our website. And that's about it. Do you guys do any members have any questions?
Go ahead. I have a question about e-blasts.
Yes.
Do we routinely e-blast certain items out regularly? And how do we measure, along with our social media accounts and all, how do we measure effectiveness of e-blasts, or do we receive feedback on e-blasts or even social media, I guess? I will say as a recipient of e-blasts, I love them.
Yeah. So I do get a report. Vincent Azar helped set it up for me. So thank you, Vincent. He has a report that comes to me monthly, and every month it has a list of all of our current licensees, which is good because if anybody was currently licensed the month prior, they're on that list. And I swap out those email addresses to try to make sure that we do get everybody. Unfortunately, sometimes licensees unsubscribe, but when we get that list, they get resubscribed. So, but as far as like measuring like how many people received it and stuff like that, I don't get a report on that. And then we do send out everything board meeting related. So like the agenda, if there's a new regulation or a new law that comes out, we'll send that out. Just we use it as much as we can to get stuff out. But I will say we do post probably a lot more on social media just because all the other little things that don't go out that way. But
I appreciate that your feedback and that you enjoy the e-blasts. I will tell you that we do receive quite a bit of feedback from folks who don't necessarily enjoy the e-blasts. And I guess a symbol of that would be what April was kind of alluding to, is that the software platform that we use always allows for the receiver of the e-blast to unsubscribe from the list. We've been using this software for even before we had an email requirement in our address regulation. So the software was designed in a bygone era, if you will. And so that report that April and Vincent run, people may have who don't want to receive the e-blast unsubscribed. They're just going to get resubscribed every 30 days, basically. So they're still going to get them. And sometimes we get some feedback like, hey, I unsubscribed. And then we have to explain to them, you have a regulatory obligation to provide to us your email address if you have one, and we are going to use it for communication purposes. Having said that, some of the things that we send for, agenda materials, the announcement of board meetings, changes in legislation or regulation, recruitments for expert consultants or the announcement of expert consultant trainings, those kind of things.
Disciplinary action.
Well, the disciplinary action's a little bit different. I'm all for it, but it would be frowned upon. I think we put our disciplinary actions in a number of different places. Obviously, they're accessible on the search.dca.ca.gov website. And we also put them in our newsletters, right? So a long time ago, we might have even put them on our Facebook page and social media when the effective dates took effect. And that's kind of the same concept of doing it in e-blast. The maybe overactive or over proactive delivery of that information isn't necessarily welcomed by all. And it is kind of accentuating the negative to a certain extent. That is kind of the gist of our existence, though, as sad as that is to say, is that's what we're here for. And one of those things is to let the population know as well as the consumers know of those kind of things. So we're still looking for new ways to use e-blast. We're even looking for new e-blast software and modernization of that. But it's just another tool that we'll be using for the delivery of so many different types of messaging.
So is the system we're using now specific to PTBC or?
It is a service that the software itself is shared across the department. It's essentially listserv. It's a very common mail delivery brand. They have had some upgrades to the software, and we are benefiting from those. But there may be some more advanced, technologically speaking, software packages out there, maybe easier to use, that kind of thing. All of our licensees are required to provide to us an email address if they have it. But we still have quite a large percentage of folks in the system that we don't have an email address for. And so they're not included in that listserv package. As their email addresses are revealed to us and we include them in the library, they're updated on that 30-day frequency.
Is it possible to remove the unsubscribe option?
No, apparently. We tried. So. And it's not a no as like disapproved. It's not something you can do within the listserv software itself. So.
April, I had a question.
Yes.
On under the website data, it indicates that you had an increase in the hits for the licensee tab. Was that over 131% over what? Over the last quarter or over like the last year?
This time last year, so quarter one last fiscal year.
So
in comparison
comparatively
this
to
quarter one.
first quarter, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Does that matter in terms of where it falls within the time frame of people applying after school graduation? Is that with
It can, right? It's certainly affected by that sometimes. Part of it is just the transition to the new website template
That's
and
what I
the
was about to
familiarity
say.
also. But it could be, really looking at the statistical numbers, that could be one given graduating class, right? Like, so it could be attributed to something as simple as it was captured in quarter two
not quarter one, because it was a day or two difference.
And then after this quarter, it's the new website. Like comparing that to the old website shouldn't really matter because we rolled it out last year in September.
Yeah.
So after this quarter, it's new website versus new website. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
not going to be.
That's what I was wondering, because I definitely think it is so much easier to access now, and people are probably more likely to get right to what they need.
You know, that's a great point too. Having said that, is that there are actually no, and April and I have had this discussion at length. She is not in the position to have like a static quarter to quarter comparison for just about anything in what she reports, right? So the website changed. So now we're talking about apples to oranges comparison. Facebook changes the way they quantify their measures. Instagram, same thing. TikTok, we don't have year to year comparison. LinkedIn, we're even utilizing LinkedIn a little bit differently, and they have a different metric that they're measuring things by. So I guess what I would say is the metrics that are provided to you are worth, you know, the paper that they're written on. You have to really look at them to determine the kind of the quantity versus quality analysis, right? So some of those things where we might have less people liking us this year compared to last year. And one of the things I was going to point out is, if I remember right, the TikTok number was because you had a really popular video this time last year. Right? And so
Yeah,
like
so
that
that'll
popular
always-
video was,
yeah.
it performed really well. And so that could just be the one thing that's enough to skew the statistic. Overall, though, you see the impressions are going up. The other thing that I would also point out is, and it's anecdotal at best, we've always anticipated kind of a decrease in the use of Facebook and an increase in the use of X, Twitter, and TikTok. And I think you see some of that reflected in the numbers too. And it's just a change in our demographic and who we're, you know, in our licensing population and who we're trying to reach out to.
My last question is, are you still needing something from us as a board regarding content? Do you have like an outline for the next quarter of things that you might be needing in terms of content? Besides what you already asked us for, which I hope we're all providing.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure things will come up. There's all kinds of new stuff that comes out, as even like TikTok videos. There's all kinds of new trends that come out, and so as they come out, I'll let you guys know.
Okay.
But we'd also like to take the opportunity to kind of just put that back onto you as members. If there are things that you want done, or there's things that you would like to see, let us know. We're always looking for ideas for content.
Go ahead, Michael.
I would like to just thank Ms. Beauchamp for her excellent report and apologize for my distractions. Apparently, I don't know how to operate voicemail, and when I go back to make sure it doesn't happen again, it happens again. So, my apologies.
No worries.
Were we going to,
What's voicemail?
were we going to discuss any further about the FSBPT website audit tool, or not? It's just something we're looking at for the future.
Well, after the first of the year, I'm going to release it to you as members as a homework assignment, but we're also looking at other stakeholder groups. In fact, we've had consultation with CPTA, and Tamika and Stacy have graciously volunteered to find staff at CPTA to do it. And I'm looking for different perspectives in the audience to look at it, almost with a layperson's view, with no expectations, no preconceived notions. They've been to the, I want somebody who's been to the website 1,000 times, and I want somebody who's never been to the website. I really want to run that tool through the gambit and see what it produces for us, so that we can kind of look at it and glean any kind of efficiencies or and realize any kind of changes in a positive way, just to tweak it even that much more.
Which stakeholders are you looking at for?
So
feedback?
I'll be looking for educators in our PT and PTA programs, students that are in those PT and PTA programs even, because I think that really kind of gives me the I've never been to the website perspective before. We are looking for consumer stakeholders. Those are clearly some of the hardest ones to find. Shamelessly, I will say, for me, friends and family kind of fall into that category. So and they're not watching today, so I can say that. They don't even know it's coming. Board members, obviously, and then even staff members are still going to be doing it as well. I have a few select peers throughout DCA that I'm going to be leaning on and relying to have them do it as well. And they'll probably just say, why bother? The website's great as it is.
But I didn't have a question. I just had a statement. I'm really appreciating the footnote for the social media illiterate to explaining what likes and reach impressions and engagements are in your report. So really appreciate that footnote.
Some of you may have been present in some of our outreach presentations, and one of the things that we always do in conclusion is, ask how many students are in a given cohort, and then we threaten them with, well, then we should expect to see that number of likes when we go back to our social media accounts tomorrow. I think that also could be attributed to some of the anomaly numbers that occur from quarter one to quarter one, year to year comparisons, because if last year we happened to do 2 more classes that were very thorough and all the students in that class took us seriously and thought that I would write them a citation that if they didn't like our Facebook page, they did. And then the next year we didn't have that same experience. That's enough to really kind of skew the statistic.
Well, thank you, April. Any further comments or questions from the board? Jason?
Yes, ma'am.
None?
Oh, no, the only thing that I will tell you and I was just going to touch on it for the high school presentations. One of the lessons learned, one of the interesting parts of it, I think, and April will probably say the same thing, is that it's interesting to have the conversation with a parent-child, right? Because we have to be more nimble in that conversation anyway. We're talking to 2 different audiences simultaneously at the same time. And doing the career fairs, that part was like, oh, wow, this is going to be a completely different presentation than what we thought it was going to be.
Yes.
And then I just recall one gentleman in particular who came to us to ask questions and said, I'm going to the NFL.
Oh, yes.
And I said, oh, okay. He said, but I'm thinking, in case something bad happens, if I was a physical therapist, I could stay with the team and help out my fellow teammates. And I was like, I see where you're going with this.
Yes.
That sounds like a plan to me.
Yes.
And at the same time, it's like, well, what does your mom think about it? But it was a really enjoyable experience.
Love it. Any public comment? Hearing none. Thank you, April.
Thank you.
So I think we have covered everything. So now we're going to go to
11.
So we will go to agenda item number 11, and then we will break for a closed session. Please note that the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section that is not included on this agenda, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. So we are now at agenda item number 11, public comment on items not on the agenda. And hearing none, we will recess,
Recess in the
yes.
closed session.
And we'll go into closed session. Thank you.